So we are going to get started. This is our fourth Bible study in the series of parenting through gospel conversations on complex cultural issues. I'm basing it off of this book. And over the last 3 weeks, we've talked about using the gospel as a framework for our conversations. We've talked about the context of the world that we live in and why that's so important. We've talked about the gospel message and how important that is. And last week, we talked about what is our mission. And then within all of those different things, how do we position ourselves as parents to be able to communicate these things to our kids? So if you haven't checked out, use the gospel as a framework, make sure that you go back and listen to those. I've been putting them in a guide, and every time we do a new 3-part thing, I'm going to do a new guide. So they'll be kind of sectioned out. It'll be easier for you to find what you're looking for. And so tonight we're going to talk about human dignity. And we're going to cover this in 3 parts as well. So tonight we'll be discussing abortion. Next week, we'll discuss human dignity as it pertains to racial reconciliation. And then the 3rd week, we will talk about how that works with end-of-life care. So those are kind of the 3 areas that we'll be covering around this particular topic. So tonight is all about the topic of abortion. So let's get started. First, I'm going to pray, and then we'll get going. Father, thank you so much for your word. Thank you that it is absolute truth and that we can count on it. Thank you for your wisdom. It says in James that anyone who asks wisdom of God, that you are generous, that you give it generously and without reproach. And that we must believe, asking in faith without any doubting. And so that's what we do. We come to you tonight asking for wisdom without any doubting, believing that you do give us the ability to take the knowledge that we have and work it together for good, for your glory, and share it with our children. So thank you, Jesus, for that. Please bless our Bible study tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so let's get started with human dignity. So first of all, what is dignity? What does it mean to honor human dignity? Well, I asked a few other people, and several words that came up were honor, love, respect. And one thing that seemed to be a across the board commonality is that those things were true regardless of capacity. So regardless of the individual's ability to perform in some way or produce something in some way, that there was human dignity meant that we honor and respect no matter what, whether they're capable of providing us any value or not, we still respect them. So obviously, part of the reason that we value human dignity is because we are made in the image of Christ. So in order to start there, I want to make sure that we jump over to Genesis 1. Genesis 1, because this is where we were made, right? Made in the image of God, image of Christ. And it says in verses 26 and 27, then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So we see here that we are unique in creation in that no other creature on the planet was made in the image of God. We were made in his likeness. And I don't believe that that's just about our bodies. I think that's just 1/3 of how we were made in the image of God. We have our body, we have our soul, our mind, our will, our emotions, and we have a spirit. And so all three of those components, I think, are aspects of the image of God. And therefore, the image is precious. It's valuable because it is that likeness of the Holy Father that we have the opportunity to emulate. And not only did he make us that way, but he put us in the earth, and we have the opportunity to be his ambassadors to other people. We are not only made in his image, but we're called to be image bearers to other people. So it's not just about how we're made, it's about how we behave as well. And he created all of that, which is sacred and holy. Not only did he make us that way, but we see later in the chapter where he says, and God saw everything he made, and behold, it was very good, right? So what he made was good. It's precious in his sight. So all humans are made in the image of God. And so that is kind of the basis of the sacredness of human life, of human dignity. I think one of the things that the book talks about, that they point out, is that when God is not our head, then we often will seek to exalt someone else into a position. If we don't recognize God and then everybody, if we take God off the throne, no, he's not in charge, then we have to figure out what is the substitute that we're going to put in that place. And as we do that, we start looking for, okay, who's worthy to go in the place of God, or who's worthy to lead in that position? So you might start looking at people who are intelligent or rich or wise or have a lot of power, really beautiful. Those kinds of things are what humans start looking for as like, what qualifies as an elevated significance over everything? But that's not the way that God created us. He created us all equally. And there are levels of like order, like hierarchy, because just operating an organization or things like that, there are ways that we order ourselves so that everybody has a job to do, right? But in this idea of who gets to decide who lives and dies, who's created and who isn't created, if we take God off the throne, then it's pretty arbitrary what we come up with as far as like what should be there instead. And thus that creates the problem of some human life is more valuable than other human life, because my perception of what's convenient and comfortable and understandable to me as a human is probably much different than what feels comfortable and understandable to you. Perfect example is that some people are really knocked over by very blunt and direct individuals and be like, whew, I don't know if that's really hard to deal with that person. And that might not naturally be a person that you would put in a position of power. But I've grown up with parents that are very blunt and direct, and we've learned how to work together. And it feels very natural to me, even if we butt heads, it feels very natural to me to interact with somebody who is blunt and direct. And so that might think like, oh, that's no big deal. In fact, I think they would make a great leader because they're going to speak their mind and speak the truth, not make somebody else go and cry for days, right? So the idea of we start deciding who's more important and who should get leadership and who is worthy for privilege based on what we're comfortable with, rather than recognizing, no, all life has value. And how can we communicate that to the people around us? So that's where we get the lie that the mother is more important than the child in this area of abortion. Well, she should have a right to her life. She should have a right to decide. She's the intelligent person. She's the one that already has a life. She's the one that's already got things going. This other thing, and we can marginalize it simply because we don't have a way to identify with it. We don't have a way to connect with it, with him or her in the womb. The mom, we get it. We can empathize. Oh, you're pregnant. You had a career. You had expectations. Oh, that's so hard. We can empathize with her, right? But it's hard to empathize with the little teeny tiny baby that's in the womb, right? Which causes us to sort of naturally side with, especially if you're an unbeliever, naturally side with the mom, because we can see her plight, we can see her pain. We don't see the pain over here. And we'll get into this more later in the other talks about how valuable it is that when we are drawn towards one direction and not another, then it's counterintuitive, but the way to better understand is to lean in and understand these people more, to learn about people that are different from us. And that includes little babies. So it's important to remember that God said to love our neighbor and to love our enemy. So on one hand, I think of that as like a line, right? We have our neighbor. I think of that as like the people closest to me. And then we have our enemy, the person that we hate the most, the person that we would rather not have in our life, the evil person. My son prays for Kim Jong-un on a regular basis. And so when I think of enemy, he's a name that comes to mind. But God said, love your enemy, right? So we have this sort of line of neighbor to enemy. Where are your children on that line? Where is that little baby on that line? Well, it's somewhere. It's not off in a different dimension. Somewhere on that line, that continuum is that child. And it's our choice to love all of God's children, all of life, and that includes those babies. One fascinating thing I wanted to point out, of course, there's the Psalm 139 verses 13 through 16 that talks about before, like I knit you together in your mother's womb. What is it? It says, for it was you who created my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I will praise you because I have been remarkably and wondrously made. Your works are wondrous, and I know this very well. My bones were not hidden from you when I was made in secret. When I was formed in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw me when I was formless. All my days were written in your book and planned before a single one of them began. So this is a great passage to talk about with your kids, any age. Like, what does it mean for God to say that he created our inward parts? What does it mean that we were wondrously made? Or what do you think it means when it says my bones were not hidden from you when I was made in secret? You can ask children to explore the different words in the passage, and they begin to think about how, like, get a real picture of, no, this is not just some little blob of tissue. God is actively forming it, which leads me to the other verse I wanted to tell you about, Jeremiah 1:5. Now, this is a familiar passage too for people who are pro-life. Jeremiah 1:5. But I want to tell you a little bit about some of the words specifically in this verse. So the verse, Jeremiah 1:5 says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. So the first little section is about all of mankind. He gets more specific to Jeremiah later in that verse. But I just want to talk about the first couple of phrases. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. So the word formed, if you look it up in the Hebrew, the word formed is the same word that God uses in Genesis when he says when in the Bible where it says that God formed Adam, he made him out of the dust. It's a word that talks about, that's used as a potter is sort of modeling clay. So when he's molding things together, he's creating it. So he formed us in the womb. It's not just random stuff happening. He's actually creating it and putting it together. The second word that I want to bring your attention to is knew. What does it mean that I knew you? Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Well, that word doesn't just mean intellectual knowledge. It doesn't just mean, oh, I knew about you. I knew what parts you'd have. I knew whether or not you'd be a girl or a boy. It actually means that this word knew in the Hebrew actually describes the most intimate of relationships. It's like God was thinking about him in a personal way. Like, you don't just know your son has black hair and brown eyes and tan skin. You don't just know that your daughter likes horses and unicorns. No, you know them. Like you know that if you tell that joke, it will make them cry rather than laugh. You know that if you leave the light on when they come home, that it will make them feel safe. You know that this particular kind of movie is something that blesses them, and this is one that they don't want to watch. You know that they always want that special kind of cereal, or that seat in the living room is their favorite, right? You know, when you walk into a store and you see a particular item that you're like, oh, that would speak love to my child. That kind of knowing, like, I know you personally. He knew us personally before he formed us in our bodies. Okay. And then the third word that I want to point out is consecrated. Before you were born, I consecrated you. Before we were born, consecrated means set apart, dedicated to a specific purpose. Do you realize that when we were still, before we were in our mother's womb, God already had a specific purpose for each and every one of us on this earth? It is fascinating that he already had designed exactly what he had called us to do, who he wanted us to be, what we would grow up as, what we would create, all of those things before we were ever in our mother's womb. And this is why there's a huge difference between, and I think that this is important to share with our kids, is that one of the foundational differences between people who say they're pro-choice and believe in abortion, and people who say they're pro-life, who think that abortion is wrong, is that pro-choice people tend to say that they're not really even disposing of a body. It's just medical waste, or it's a fetus or something like that. We actually hold pro-life, say it's not just a body. We are a spirit first. We are spiritual beings who have a soul and a body. And when you destroy that, you aren't just destroying a body, you are destroying a spirit that was made in the image of God. You're destroying a mind, a will, a plan, a purpose. You're killing all of it, not just tissue. And that's one of the big differences. And one of the reasons why people don't see eye to eye, because we're like, oh, kill it or don't kill it is not actually, like, we're not talking about the same thing. They're talking about throwing away tissue. We're talking about disposing of the spirit of the living God, right? It's remarkably different. Not to mention that, side note, the idea of, I think this is a great one for teenagers to talk about with, because they're right in the time of their life where they can understand what logical fallacies are. But this idea of pro-life and pro-choice is actually a logical fallacy. We are actually studying this in my 7th grade class with my daughter, Renna. We're studying logical fallacies. And so they would be able to point out that pro-life, pro-choice is actually a logical fallacy. It's called the either or fallacy. What that means is that we're asserting that we must choose between two things when in fact we have more than two alternatives. For instance, can you be pro-life and pro-choice at the same time? You can, because you can believe that a woman has a right to choose what to do with her body, in the sense of she can choose not to have sex. That's the choice she can make, right? So pro-choice. Yes, I'm all for you choosing when you are going to have a baby. Don't have sex. That's the choice you get to make. And I get people argue all about things like, well, what if they're raped or something like that? But by and large, we don't make, that's also a logical fallacy. Like, we don't make a decision based on the difficulty, the rare difficulties. We make a decision on the bigger picture of, like, what is the main problem going on, right? Even in that choice, we know that as believers, does that negate the fact that babies are made in the image of God and have an innate purpose and a spirit? No. So is it a hard thing? Yeah, it is a hard thing. And sometimes we have to go through hard things in life. Just like somebody who's born with no legs has to go through something really hard in life. Just like somebody who's born with a really uncomfortable skin condition has to go through something really hard in life. It doesn't mean that we get to take life away from somebody else because we are faced with our own difficulty. So that's an important thing, I think, that we can discuss with our teens. All right, let me make sure I grab my other points. Let's see. Oh, yeah. So Matthew 25, verse 40 talks about doing things to the least of these. It says, which I think is another great discussion you can have with your kids. So that I'll back up the context. It says, it's talking about when the Son of Man comes into his glory, who will come? And this is talking about, like, are you actually acting like a servant of Christ? Okay. So verse 34 says, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? So they're thinking the literal Jesus, like, I haven't seen you naked. You didn't need any clothes, right? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? Then the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it unto me. So it's not talking about the value of human life there. There's no greater or lesser human life, but there are people who have greater need or lesser need, and or they have a greater need. So when he's saying do it one of the least of these, my brothers, he's talking about the people that have the greatest need. There's these people that have way more needs than you do right now. And are you helping them? So I can't think of a better example of the least of these than baby in the womb, unborn child who can't speak for themselves, who can't make a decision, who can't feed themselves, they can't get water for themselves. They are definitely naked. And if you don't take care of them, then they get sick and die. They literally need you to take care of them. So it is a call on our life to serve the least of these, my brothers. There's the other verse that talks about in James 1:27 that talks about pure and undefiled religion before God is this: to visit orphans and widows in distress and to keep yourself unstained from the world. So it talks about the value of, the importance of paying attention to the least of these, so to speak, right? It includes increased awareness around foster and adoption, and not necessarily that we need to be fostering and adopting all of the kids ourselves. There are people that are called to that. Maybe you're one of them, but can you at least come alongside and help someone else who is? Can you come alongside a widow in your neighborhood and help them along? That's part of valuing human dignity. It's the whole life, valuing the whole life. So then there's a couple of other things here that I wanted to, just ways to kind of help talk to your kids about these things. One of the things that you can help make it easier to talk about the value of life is to create love for children with your kids. Do your kids babysit? Do they see the growth and changes in a little child? Do they have opportunity to really be around little kids and see that growth process? Some kids are going to have younger siblings and they get to see that process. The younger siblings, not so much. So sometimes you have to create those scenarios. We are blessed to have, goodness, like gobs and gobs of nieces and nephews. And so even though I have younger kids that haven't had little brothers and sisters, they have nieces and nephews come over and they learn how, they're growing and they're changing and they're learning new skills and they're and creating a love for caring for them and valuing them as this is already a whole person with a whole purpose, with a whole spirit that God loves, that he created a unique purpose for in the world. Like this little bitty child is here on purpose. And when we can show our kids that, yes, this little thing right here that just lays on the couch and spits up and poops in his pants has value. When we can establish that, then it's a whole lot easier to then establish that the child in the womb also has value. Make sense? So the other thing that's always fascinating is you can read about the miracle of life with your kids. You don't have to get gross or super, super detailed with your younger ones, but it is a miracle that anybody gets pregnant in the first place. So if it happens, it happened on purpose. Like, yes, two people came together, but even two people coming together, on average, there's still only a 15 to 25% chance that a woman will actually get pregnant. So the fact that it happens to begin with is actually miraculous, and we should value it as such. Even for somebody who makes a decision to have sex out of marriage or a rape or something like that, the life is valuable. The choice that was made to get there might not have been a godly choice. Sometimes, like, people sin, but the life is valuable. It's miraculous, and we should value it as such. And sometimes you got to dig up, like, all the different things that have to actually happen at exactly the right time, in exactly the right order, with exactly the right hormones and exactly the right situation, the exact right temperature for the exact right amount of time to be able to have a baby happen in the first place. It is a miracle, and it's one we're celebrating. And then the other thing that I think is really fun to discuss with kids is the progress that a child makes in the womb, especially if you are pregnant. This was one of my favorite things to do with my babies when I had, goodness, they were all babies at one time. But when they were younger and I was pregnant, we would talk about what new thing was going on with the baby. So at 4 weeks old, and that means like most women either just found out that they're pregnant or they don't even know yet that they're pregnant. That's what 4 weeks. So 2 weeks is when the egg and the sperm come together, and you're like, and I'm sorry if you have kids in the room, they come together and make and join together, become one. That's at 2 weeks. 4 weeks is normally when the woman would have her cycle, and she doesn't. So at that moment, there is already a beating tube that is creating a heartbeat. Like, you can't, it's not detectable yet with like ultrasound and stuff, but it's there. So I think it's fascinating that like this is not just tissue. From that, like, it's living. It's a living spirit of God that has a body. It is the breath of God breathed life into us that is encased in a human body. So we talk about, during different stages, the month 2, guess what the baby's doing? Well, it has little buds for arms and legs, and its face is getting better. From the day of conception, it has a brain that can begin learning. It continues to grow and develop over time, but day one, it has the ability to learn and respond the way it needs to. Month 3, baby gets their ears. So this is like week 10 to 14. This is still when lots of people consider that abortion is okay. On the pro-choice side, like that's still like first trimester, external ears, teeth, reproductive organs. They've got all of those, right? By month 4, they have hair and eyelids and eyelashes. You can hear the heartbeat. The teeth are dense. The baby can stretch. The nervous system is developing more fully, right? By month 5, we know that there is a chance that that baby could survive outside of the womb, and there are children that have. And so at that moment, most, like, even a lot of people who would say, no, you're pro-choice, even a lot of them would say, no, by month 5, when they can survive outside the womb, now it's not okay. So, but it doesn't change for us. That's the thing. It doesn't change for us, because from the very beginning, it is a spirit that has a body. It's made in the image of God. It has purpose. It has value. And it's our desire to honor that. And so I hope this gives you some talking points to be able to have a discussion around the value of life, even from inside the womb. And you can approach it from a really healthy, positive standpoint, like, no, we want to value this. And if you focus more on valuing it and wanting, and it's special and it's precious, then when abortion comes up, that will seem foreign. That will be like, whoa, somebody kills that? Like, what? So I know I'm over time. I want to give you a couple of resources here at the end, and I'll read them off. If you don't catch them, you can go back and re-listen to it. But a couple of resources are, I just finished reading the book Unplanned by Abby Johnson. If you've never read that book, it is amazing. It's probably not a read for little bitty kids. Like I wouldn't necessarily read it out loud to little bitty kids, but I think it would, like, I would personally read it out loud to my preteens and my teenagers, just to be able to discuss the different viewpoints of people who, someone who sided with abortion and pro-choice for a long time. Actually, she didn't really, but you can read, but she was part of Planned Parenthood, and definitely fought for that pretty heavily, and then flipped sides and felt like that was not the way to go. And so it's a wonderful biography of God transforming her heart. It's a great way to introduce the topic to your older kids. And honestly, it's just a really good read. It's written like a fictional story, but it's a really well written biography of this girl's decision that she made, this woman's decision. So that's a great book. The other one that is a little bit along the same line, this is not going to cover like pregnancy, but if you're a homeschooler or you like reading out loud to your kids and you want something different, this book, More Than Meets the Eye by Richard Swenson, is really good. God's fascinating glimpses into God's power and design. And it goes through and talks about all the different parts of our body and how he put them together and the details that had to go into that in order to make it functional and valuable. So those are two books. So that's Unplanned by Abby Johnson and More Than Meets the Eye by Richard Swenson. Okay. So those are our two books. That's just two books that I wanted to recommend. And I think that is everything for this topic. Listen, I want to remind you, you don't have to know all the answers when you start talking to your kids about these things. It's so valuable to just bring up the topic. And when they ask you a question and you don't know the answer to it, it's okay to say, I don't know. It lets our kids know that we are not God and that we seek him for the answers too. So let it be an I don't know, and pray about it. When he gives you the answer, you can come back and you can be like, oh, God showed me the answer to this the other day. I came across a father the other day who keeps a little thing in his phone of questions that he doesn't have the answer to. And we were talking the other day, he pulled some of them up. He's like, hey, do you happen to have a good answer for this? And we were just Brandon and I were talking with this other couple, and it was amazing. I was like, oh my goodness, what a way to honor his growth as a Christian, honor his family, that when he comes across something he doesn't know the answer to, it's important to him to seek it out. And so he keeps a little list of the things that he's seeking answers for. I was just charmed. And I think hey, I think I'm going to pick that up myself. So you can do that too. Put it in a little note and seek the Lord about it. All right. So that concludes our discussion for today. I hope this has been a blessing. Next week, we'll be talking about racial reconciliation. And so I hope I'll see you back. For those of you who are on Zoom, hang in there. When I disconnect, we'll chat. Okay. Talk to you next week.